I'd like to call to order the City Council study session of April 28th, 2026. Clerk, please call the roll.
Deputy Mayor Bushnell.
Present.
Councilmember Diaz. Absent Councilmember Hines. Here. Councilmember Palmer. Councilmember Rumba.
Here.
Councilmember Sidalge. Absent Councilmember Scott.
Here.
Councilmember Walker.
Here.
Mayor Ibsen.
Here. We have one agenda modification, item number 4, Pierce County Flood Control Zone District Advisory Committee appointment, and that'll be discussed at a later time. Our first agenda item is our 2026 legislative update. I'd like to call on Senior Government Relations Advisor Alex McBain to begin the presentation, and Brianna Murray from Gordon Thomas Honeywell is also present.
Thank you, and appreciate the ability to give this presentation. Very happy that Brianna from our state lobbyist is here. She and her team do so much to help us. And she'll be here to help answer any questions. And I'll move forward on the slide. So I wanted to start with a quick review of the process we use to develop the 2026 legislative agenda, in part because we'll be beginning that process shortly here for the 2027 legislative agenda. So last summer through the fall and summer, we had discussions about issues and priorities with individual council members. Based on those conversations and other issues that were before council, we crafted drafts of the legislative policies or legislative priorities and the policy positions documents. We followed up with 2 study sessions where we discussed those priorities and policies. And then finally in November, the council formally adopted the state legislative priorities and the policy positions document. And we'll talk a little bit more about those those priorities and when we get into the discussion of the outcomes. But just quickly, the priorities for this last session were response to the federal government, fiscal sustainability. We had a capital request for a trickling filter at the wastewater treatment plant, and then we had identified 3 issues, or you had identified 3 issues of importance. One was wastewater treatment plant nutrient regulation, route jurisdiction transfer, and then the issues around infrastructure funding and sidewalk utility. The policy positions document was a longer document that identifies policy priorities, and the Government Relations Office uses that as a guide for advocacy work in the fast-paced session. With the priorities identified, we began the work of connecting with our legislative delegation, in addition to individual discussions with individual delegation members. In December, prior to session, we had a briefing on the city's priorities with our legislative delegation members, and then it followed up with a dinner in Olympia with our delegation members in February. In terms of the session debrief, I would just say the March 12th marked the very end of a very challenging session. There were more bills introduced than a normal second-year session, so it was very active. There were over 1,200 new bills introduced, and then 268 bills were passed. The major themes in the session were response to federal government and tax structure reform, and all of that was with the large state budget deficit as the sort of backdrop of the entire session. In terms of the tax structure reform, we wanted to highlight that there was historic legislation in the form of millionaire's tax that was unveiled by House and Senate leaders and the governor at the very start of session, and it took a lot of bandwidth out of the throughout the session. The tax is a 9.9% levy on adjusted gross income above $1 million per year. That would take effect in January 2028. The major features include funding to expand the working families tax credit. 5% of the proceeds would support the Fair Start for Kids, which is supporting child care and early learning programs. There was a series of tax changes, including implementing exemptions for businesses under $300,000 gross income from B&O, eliminating sales tax on many over-the-counter drugs, diapers, and certain personal care products, and then rolling back some of the sales tax services that were sales tax on services that were enacted in 2025. The bill did include an emergency clause, so it wasn't eligible for a referendum, but there are legal challenges forthcoming, and it will likely be the subject of a ballot initiative. In terms of the city's legislative priorities, I'll start with the response to the federal government and immigration and detention issues. I would say, first of all, the legislative budget allocated about $380 million in food assistance and Medicaid that offset some of the federal cuts in those areas. Around immigration and detention, there were a slate of immigration detention related bills that were introduced, and then our Tacoma elected officials testified 5 times on these bills. And then I just highlight these bills that did pass. First was HB 2105 regarding immigrant worker protections, 2165, which increases the penalties for impersonating law enforcement, SB 5855, which prohibits law enforcement from wearing masks, and then SB 6002, which concerns driver privacy protections. In terms of the fiscal sustainability, because of the state's large budget deficit, there was a focus on encouraging the ledge to sustain historical revenue sharing partnerships between state and local government, and then to support proposals that would provide local governments with sustainable, progressive, and equitable tax system, including new revenue tools and flexibility with existing revenues. So some of the better news related to the outcomes on the fiscal sustainability were most of the state shared revenues were preserved with some minor exceptions. The legislature did pass a local government flexibility bill that provides additional flexibility around existing revenues and additional sales tax authority. It included a 0.1% councilmatic sales tax for child care, perinatal support, before and after school youth services. It provided some flexibility with housing sales tax, the HB 1590 funds. It expands the usage of REIT 2 to revenues to include nuisance abatement. It extends the maximum length that a levy lift can be approved by voters to 10 years. It authorizes new county property tax for public health clinics, and then allows the creation of a municipal fire district with an independently elected board of fire commissioners within 2 years of the district's formation. Some of the less optimal outcomes related to the fiscal sustainability issues, there was another diversion from the Public Works Assistance Account. It should not impact projects that are currently funded, but it would potentially puts at risk future projects or funding for future projects. And then assuming the millionaire sales tax is upheld, city revenue will be reduced from the sales tax exemptions that were included as part of that bill. And so the 4-year balance sheet that the legislature authorized it does assume $200 million to cities and counties for local impacts, but it does not mitigate all of the sales tax on services and that were enacted in 2025. Some of the takeaways and next steps on this are to continue to highlight with legislators the cities are facing significant budget shortfalls and deficits, and to highlight the fact that as the city taxes grow more aggressive, as the state has been working to make the state's taxes more progressive. So in the short term, we need to continue that dialogue. The state has made efforts for making a less aggressive tax system, and examples include the capital gains tax that they've done, and then this millionaire's tax this last year. But the state has continued to offer local governments more aggressive options. So in the last 2 years, they've authorized increases in sales tax for public safety and then for child care or child and family services. And then a long-term strategy is to sort of develop concrete proposals for local government tax reform. We want to also highlight about advocating for the $200 million to ensure, pushing to make sure that that placeholder $200 million for local government mitigation is adjusted to fully mitigate the impact on an ongoing basis. And that's going to be critically important for municipalities across the state, I would say. In terms of the capital budget, this was one of the bright spots, again, from this last session. The legislature did approve $1.7 million for the North End treatment plant trickling filter. We did get feedback from a number of legislators to focus more on projects that can't be funded through existing revenue streams. So this is one of those ones that could be funded through a utility rate. We did push on the affordability issue around this, which is in part why it did get funded. But the feedback was to try to push for projects that don't have those alternate funding sources or revenue streams. And then the slide identifies some additional capital investments that were included in the budget, among them the $2 million for the Museum of Glass HVAC system, and then $924,000 in planning dollars for the Tacoma Pierce County Health Hub, and that would be at the old Fred Meyer's location. And then in terms of we also identified some other issues of importance. The first was to engage the legislature on the Department of Ecology's proposed wastewater treatment plant nutrient regulation. And the council, you've had a number of presentations on that issue and understand just prior to session, DOE made a change in their strategy, moving away from the nutrient general permit to pursuing a facility-by-facility permit approach. And so while we did work with to educate our delegation members on the issue, due to that change, it wasn't a hot topic during session. In terms of next steps, we do want to continue that education process with the delegation members, and we'll talk about this a little bit. But we're hoping for a tour of the North End wastewater treatment plant, in part because this issue will probably be coming up again next year. Regarding the route jurisdiction transfers, there was a bill that did get introduced that would level the playing field with WashDOT concerning highway abandonments and route jurisdiction transfers to local governments. The legislation did get out of the House with no votes, but didn't advance in the Senate. And so our next steps here are to engage the Transportation Committee legislators to begin to get a better understanding of the outstanding issues on this bill and whether it was whether there are outstanding issues or it was a matter of timing in a short budget session and sort of tough negotiations around the transportation budget that sort of made it run out of time before the end of session. And then around sidewalk utility and the development of new tools for infrastructure needs, there is the continuing statewide study from the Joint Transportation Committee to explore sidewalk funding mechanisms. Tacoma is participating in the case study portion of that ongoing study. The consultant is looking at a number of options, including creation of a sidewalk utility, transportation benefit district sales tax, a new REIT option, and a modified stormwater utility fee. Those are all things that the consultant is looking at in their final report. We're hoping that final report is out this summer or fall. In terms of other interim activities, this is going to be an election year, so all the members of the House and half the Senate will be up for re-election. There are a number of changes in even in this, our local districts. So Senator Conway is retiring. There will be some changes in even in our local delegation. In terms of some of the efforts we're going to make with engagement, I think I mentioned that we were planning on a tour of the North End wastewater treatment plant to help continue to highlight and educate members on the issues around the around nutrients and this. And then the other issue that we were going to be engaging members on is I think 2 years ago we got a lot of good traction with members on budget issues that the city was facing. And so I want to explore options to engage the members on as the city develops its next biennial budget and keep our delegation members find ways to keep them up to date on what the budget looks like and the choices that the council is thinking about in terms of options for solving the structural budget deficit that the city's facing. We'll also be tracking actions around the millionaire's tax. Like as I said, there are likely legal challenges, and it might be subject to an initiative. So we'll be tracking what that is, and we'll also be working, I think, with AWC to understand, try to get a better sense of the $200 million to focus on what that really looks like going forward. And then with AWC, their legislative priority committee meets later this week, and so they're starting to develop their AWC priorities for this next session, and then the annual conference is in June in Spokane. And then, it's sort of the legislative agenda development process. We'll have a first draft of those legislative priorities and policy positions sometime this summer, and in advance of that, we'll have a number of probably discussions individually with council members to understand some of the priorities and issues that they want to highlight going forward. We'll make some refinements to those priorities in the fall with presentations at study sessions in October and November, and then hopefully in November we'll have the formal adoption of the legislative priorities. And we'll again meet with our legislative delegation in December to kind of highlight what those priorities are, and then session will begin again in January. So, and with that, I think we're open to any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Alex. Are there any comments or questions from the council? Councilmember Walker.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you all both for all of your work. I know there are teams of people behind you too, so thank you to all. I am very interested in getting to work in the interim to get us set up for success next year. I know you talked a little bit about the city or jurisdictional funding and how it interacts with the millionaire's tax and those conversations. Is that something that council members can help with in setting up meetings with legislators, or is that something staff is doing on their own? Can we coordinate on that? Is that helpful? What do you? How can we help?
I think it would be very helpful to get engagement from the council on that issue. I think that'll be presumably a big topic that is talked about at the AWC as part of their legislative priorities committee. But I think one of the things we want to do is sort of highlight from our perspective what that looks like. I think we've have, for example, on the sales tax on services, we'll now have a quarter of collections, so we can identify exactly what that means for the city of Tacoma. I think that's a number that we should be able to talk to our legislative delegation about. I think it's really important. It'll be really important to have all the engagement we can on that. I think it's going to be one of those issues where it's all in.
Okay. Great, thank you. And then I'll also just mention, I know we've talked about this at other meetings, but we have a couple really specific sound transit asks at the legislature, and I would love to coordinate with you all on those as we, at the sound transit level, get those sorted out, and so we, the city of Tacoma, can be helpful in that space too as we get ready and excited for light rail in Tacoma.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councilmember Hines.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple questions. Thank you for the presentation. Councilmember Walker, thank you for all your work in this last legislative session. I know it was a short session. It probably felt a lot longer than that. But when do the sales tax exemption, when does that all go into effect? So when the state's going to stop collecting those?
That'll all kick in like after 2028. So none of those exemptions won't kick in until the actual sale, the millionaire's tax becomes effective.
The effective date of the 200 million that is intended to offset that is unclear at this point.
Yep.
It is booked in the 27-29 state budget, but when it would become effective, how it would be distributed, whether it's one-time money or ongoing, whether it would grow with time, are all undetermined factors that the 2027 legislature would grapple with as they develop their 27-29 budget.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I know the state got rid of the sales tax and services, or at least component of that. Does that take effect now, or is that also slated for the same period?
That was a tax that was enacted in 2025 and is effective now. The city should receive the collections from that, for the first collections from that for the first quarter of 2026, and then the repeal would go into effect when the millionaire's tax goes into effect, which is January 2028.
Okay. So I was concerned that the millionaire's tax is currently under, there's a cloud of legality right now. It's currently being sued, and then there's potential ballot initiatives. So it's could be years before we actually see returns from it. I was worried that all these exemptions would wouldn't affect right now, and then we'd be left in the bag, holding the bag. But that good to know how they're timed up. My next question was one of the hats I wear. That's not this one. I'll talk about another hat in a second. What is I'm on the firefighters pension board, and I know that there was they removed a bunch of money out of the left one pension. What's the destination for that? Where's that money going?
Yeah, the operating budget assumed, I think it was a transfer of $860 or $880 million out of the budget stabilization account. Legislators intend to backfill the transfer out of the budget stabilization account with a transfer from the left one account. Budget stabilization account is also commonly referred to as the rainy day fund.
Okay. Yeah, that's been a topic of conversation with that pension board for the last couple of times I've been there. And then I think my last comment was good to see the sidewalk utility is still continuing forward, and I'd be excited to see kind of what the funding report that comes out of that. And I'm very happy that we were able to get that as part of this and talk about it at the state level. It was something I definitely have been interested in since I read about Denver deserved sidewalks, a couple of years ago. I will just take a moment to say, putting a third hat on today, the Association of Washington Cities, I currently serve as the board member for the city. I know Councilor Stalgay is stepping in to be on the Legislative Priorities Committee here. I know the mayor sent out an email about other people getting involved with committees and commissions related to the Association of Washington Cities. Encourage my colleagues, if they're not already involved or thinking about it, to consider that. It's a really good tool by which we're able to work with other cities and coordinate some of these efforts. So I know we've been looking at the parking lots for people. That's not what CAN calls it, but the sales tax parking lot exemption. And that conversation has not only been with the city of Tacoma, but also with the city of Spokane, city of Vancouver, and city of Kent. And all of that has been brought together through the work of, I guess myself and other AWC board members to kind of triangulate and bring that stuff together. So great opportunity for the rest of you if you're interested to get more involved and have more of an impact at the state level. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Rumbaugh.
Thank you. And I just want to thank you for all of your work. And I know this was a tough session, and really appreciate you sticking up for our city and all the work that you're doing. I just have a question that's kind of maybe if you could just explain something, because I don't know what it means, but we just got downgraded as a state. So what does that mean as far as being downgraded? And is that because of the way we're funding things? And if you could just talk a little bit about that possibly.
I'll share with you what I know off the top of my head, and then perhaps I'll send Alex some more detailed follow-up information that we can circulate to council. But essentially, the state is in the business of being lent funding for a variety of different purposes and issuing bonds. And so there's a credit rating that's given to the state. You can liken it to your own credit score. And that dictates what interest rates the state may be able to get on those different bonds and revenue mechanisms. So there's a crediting agencies that evaluate states, and they've flagged that for Washington State that there are some red flags in how the budget was developed and included that within their reports. So the potential impacts are that it would make it more challenging for the state to issue bonds or to get as much money out of those bonds that they are issued, so higher interest rates and things along those lines.
And how would that impact the city of Tacoma and other cities when we go to try to get funding?
So there are some programs where I would say big picture level, you all each biennium make requests into the capital budget. The capital budget is funded with bonds that a portion of the operating budget is dedicated to pay back. If the interest rate on those bonds increases, the amount of money that's available for community projects goes down. So I would say that's maybe the most high-level picturesque explanation of the impact on the city. There are also a few different programs where the city can utilize the state's credit or lending credit, and it would impact whether or not that's an appealing option to the city.
Okay, thank you for answering that.
Mm-hmm. I'll follow up with more information, because again, talking off the top of my head.
Thank you. I have a question about slide number 5 in your presentation. You can go back to that. And specifically about the policy goals relating to immigration and just protecting the rights of our community members. My understanding is that the bill that would have authorized fiscal penalties for any private detention facility refusing access to state health departments did not make it through. Is that correct?
Correct.
Can you talk more about what happened there and if there's any hope for taking another stab at that with the upcoming session?
I think there's certainly an opportunity to take another stab at it. Of the slate of bills that were introduced, there were several that didn't advance forward that I think were newer concepts that we hadn't seen introduced in the legislature before that got a good receptivity and have legs for a future session.
Yeah. And that one in particular is one that we'll follow back up with the sponsor and the committee to get a better understanding of, what were the hang-ups on that one.
Sure. All right. Any other comments? Seeing none. Alex, Brianna, thank you so much for your presentation and for all your hard work.
Of course. Our pleasure.
All right. Moving on, our second agenda item is a one-year review for Home in Tacoma. I'd like to call on Planning and Development Services Assistant Director Ryan Boudet to begin the presentation.
Good afternoon, Mayor and council members. Excited to be here to give an overview of our Home in Tacoma initiative and what we've been seeing over the first year since that launched. Just to start here, we've got a whole team to help with this presentation. So on my left is Philip Gao. He's the manager of our application services group. And then we have Robin Bolster-Grant, who's the manager of our current planning, or our land use division, and Chris Seaman on the end there is the manager of our building and site division. So obviously the Home in Tacoma initiative and the permitting process involves lots of folks, and you've got some representatives from many of the different parts of our organization involved in that. So as we start in, I do want to make reference to the report that was actually put out. So there is a physical report and a digital version of this. You probably have a copy. There was one that came out in the weekly report this last week, and it's also posted on our website. If anybody's interested in seeing more of the details, that's at tacoma.gov/home in Tacoma. So you can get the full report there. The purpose here today is really to give you a little bit of an overview, talk about what Home in Tacoma was, and really what we've been seeing from a permitting activity level in the first year. It was adopted by council, as you'll recall, back in the end of 2024. February 1st of 2025 was a launch date, kind of. And so the report that you have and the information we'll be talking about here is really that first year from February till the end of January here in 2026. So I always take the opportunity on these Home in Tacoma presentations to do a little bit of a reminder that this is part of an overarching strategy that the City Council put forward a number of years ago, and has been sort of shepherded particularly by the Center for Strategic Priorities. But Home in Tacoma was never and still is not the end-all be-all when it comes to addressing affordability challenges in the City of Tacoma. One of many efforts, there was a whole slew of initiatives incorporated into the Affordable Housing Action Strategy, and many things that the City Council has taken a lot of great action on over the last number of years, including the creation of an affordable housing fund with dedicated funding that's really increased the amount of dedicated affordable housing, rent-restricted affordable housing that's been created in the City of Tacoma, modifications to the surplus policy that really highlights and prioritizes affordable housing projects when we are disposing of property, work on rental protections, and also expansions of the multifamily tax exemption program, both geographically to more areas and expanding the number of ways in which people can utilize that, and focusing particularly on the portions of that program that require affordable housing provision as part of new projects. So lots of work. That's just a sampling, but always important to recognize that zoning certainly is not going to be the silver bullet that solves all problems. It's really important and was a significant initiative, and that's why we're continuing to track and implement, but there's obviously other things the city has also been doing. Now, Home in Tacoma was a pretty dramatic shift in the city's growth strategy, and particularly around the city's residential areas. It's the yellow areas on this map. It's more than half the city, and recognizing that the change was really to a system that had been in place for about 70 years, where a significant portion of the city had been reserved or dedicated for mostly single-family housing. Home in Tacoma was a dramatic shift in the city's zoning policy. It allows for now a whole variety of housing types throughout all of our residential areas. This includes, obviously, single-family homes, but in addition to that, accessory dwelling units and cottage housing and townhouses and duplexes and triplexes and all of those other types of housing developments. It clearly allows for more density in our residential neighborhoods. You can see the basic structure there in the three zones, the three urban residential zones. And it also provides bonuses in that system to try to encourage affordable units and the preservation of existing buildings. Now, one thing to note here, this is obviously a report about the Home in Tacoma initiative. It's not the whole city. If you see on that map, there's while I said it's more than half the city, well, that leaves, almost half the city that's not in the Home in Tacoma areas. And that includes some obvious areas like the port, where we generally don't, have residential development, but some other pretty significant areas in town, like the downtown and all of our mixed-use centers being the most obvious. So this report and the data we're talking about is really specific to those urban residential zones. Obviously, we have a growth strategy that highlights and encourages still the majority of growth to occur in those other higher density areas. As you can imagine, it would take a lot of duplexes in an urban residential zone to equate to essentially a single 200-unit apartment building in downtown or something like that. So certainly the majority of growth is still happening in those other areas. But the encouraging thing is that, as we've seen in the permitting activity, we are seeing a shift in both the level and density and diversity of housing coming into the city. So in addition to the zoning structure, the Home in Tacoma initiative modified our development standards, again, fairly significantly. Changes to setbacks and height limits, and really a focus on some incentives around homeownership units, incentives around tree preservation, and trying to give more flexibility around parking and setbacks and things like that to encourage some of those community benefits, as well as sort of a limited focus on design, reducing some of the previous controls and orienting more towards form and scale. So the new floor area ratio requirements and orientation to street and some other basic design components, but really staying away from architectural stylistic sort of restrictions.
Okay. So big questions are, what have we seen? And as you see on the chart on the screen, in the prior 5 years, it was averaging about 250 units being added and about 150 applications being submitted into the system. What we've seen over the first year of Home Tacoma is 385 units being proposed or issued in construction, and about 213 that were applied for. So a substantial increase being both applications and units being proposed over the last 6 years being the highest point. So in the next slide, you'll see what are we actually constructing, what's being proposed. And you can see from 2020 to 2024, a significant number of projects were just single family, just based on what the zoning would allow. And with a handful of small number but large number of units, especially in 2022, where adding some multi-family units. But in the first year of Home Tacoma, you've seen the diversification in the types of construction, big jumps in townhouse development, duplex development, and ADU development. And I think the single family and ADU still make up a majority of the application, the number of applications, but we're definitely seeing a lot more units being added to the system and into the city through duplex, multifamily, townhouses. So it's nice to see the diversification, adding the different options for the community to select from. Where's it occurring? All throughout the city. That heat map shows you where things are occurring at. Obviously, what Brian just mentioned, some of the zoning areas in New Tacoma and the South Tacoma, they already have a lot of mixed use. And so, but in the areas that are predominantly urban residential, you are seeing a good dispersion of different housing options and building types and units throughout the city. Some key findings. We are seeing that we're adding a lot more units per application. We're seeing 62% increase in the total number of units being proposed, 39% increase in total applications. And as we move through this next year, we'll obviously get more data, more information to see what's being proposed, if some of our applicants have figured out how to maximize further the density opportunities on their properties. The next couple of slides give you just some examples of projects that are either near completion or completed. First slide shows you some detached ADU structures and as well as some backyard buildings. The next slide gives you some duplexes, row houses, and mixed projects. I think the one in the far right corner, bottom right corner, is a good example of row houses. They kind of add, I think it's like seven units being added to that site. So definitely taking advantage of that corner lot and the larger lot size. The next slide just kind of shows you where we're at with the number of permit applications in the system. We're in different stages of it. I think we all anticipated or thought that maybe on the first day of Home Tacoma implementation, you'd see this big surge in permit applications. That's not what we saw. It took a little time for applications to come into the system, but they have moved through. We've got about 150 either ready to issue, issued, or completed. And as we move through the spring and summer, we anticipate we'll see a lot more completed projects as well as new applications coming into the system.
So what have we heard? Okay. Yes, my voice does not always carry. We've heard a lot, as you might imagine. The most common sentiment that we hear at the counter is from property owners saying, I didn't know I could do that. whether it's adding a backyard building or converting an existing structure or just having creativity about how to treat their property, folks are genuinely surprised. Didn't hear the early part of our rollout and are delighted. That doesn't mean that everybody's prepared to jump and move forward, but the possibilities are really exciting for folks. Our experienced developers who have been dealing with our code and know Tacoma very well are finding paths through. The code is learnable, and the early folks are proving that with the numbers. We're also getting good feedback about the willingness of staff to be flexible, accommodating this learning curve that we have all had. I am no exception to sort of figuring out how to navigate has been both challenging, but also an opportunity for us to work, I think, even closer with developers than maybe in the past, because we have to learn together. So we've gotten good feedback on our willingness to be flexible and look for areas where we can find different paths to get folks to where they want to be. And the big story, of course, is that single-family only zoning is virtually gone throughout the city, and that's significant and has been recognized by other jurisdictions and planning organizations well outside of our city. Of course, not everything has been completely smooth. We have had a few bumps along the way. And again, part of that is just grappling with something that is so different and wide-reaching. Some of the specific things that we've heard from developers has to do with the naming convention. It sounds sort of mundane, but Home in Tacoma uses terminology that is not always consistent with industry practice. So we have houseplexes, we have backyard buildings as sort of a generic, again, more form-based, but different for folks in the industry sometimes. Row houses and courtyard development. So if somebody comes in and puts on their plan, I want to build a townhouse, we have to figure out where that fits in within our new lexicon. It's not huge, but it has been surprisingly stubborn as an issue. Vehicle access, front garage limitations, we've heard that a lot. General sort of orientation. Again, this is just new. These are new permutations reflecting, as Brian said, some of the things we heard that were important that have to do with the prominence of garages, parking issues, the need for trees. All of these things on certain sites can present some real challenges. If you have a constrained site, if you don't have an alley, coming up with solutions takes time. And so we're continuing to work through that, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the ways that we have been doing that already. Unit lot subdivisions, we're still sort of, again, it's new, and we're learning together, but we're seeing more interest in creating home ownership, but it's a product that folks they're not used to. Developers, infrastructure, most of these things are not unique to Home in Tacoma, but they add with all of the other sort of the newness of the program itself. So obviously the market we have no control over, utility, apparatus, where to put your heat pump or something, power connection, garbage enclosure requirements, sort of sounds mundane, but it really can change how you present your layout and what's going to work. And then from the community, the biggest issue, I think, is that most of these projects fall a bit under the radar. They're not public. They're administratively processed, so folks don't know about them. There's not going to be a big sign in front of the property most of the time telling people what's coming. So when it shows up, we've heard some surprises. Where did this come from? Nobody told me. There's going to be some of that. That's the trade-off, right? We're either going to have more process that takes a long time, that costs more and cuts into the affordability, or we're going to have some of these things be administratively processed, and folks will voice concern about parking and traffic and kind of the usual stuff. That is the policy trade-off. So director's rules, one tool that we have for reaching some solutions to some of the problems. The utility service, where you put it and how you hide it, and instead of just saying you can't have a heat pump or something that's visible, plant some things in front of it, and we can deal with a lot of these things. The front-facing garages, that was significant, again, for constrained properties. If that's the only way in, you don't have an alley, for instance, we've created language that helps people. They don't have to get a variance to deal with that. And the group housing was something that we came through last year to make sure that the rules, Senate bill, I believe, that we were in alignment with the state requirements for group homes, how we deal with density specific to home in Tacoma and parking. So we have more potentially in the pipeline, but of course every project presents its own unique challenges. So it's not always easy finding a director's rule that covers a whole bunch of different issues, but that's one way that we can provide flexibility. And over to you.
So really, like I said, excited to be here and talking about what we've seen over the last year. I think there's some really encouraging signs in the permitting activity. I mean, this is at some level focused on permitting activity, not necessarily on completed projects, because of just where we are 1 year in and the realities of time that it takes to put together residential projects. But it's really nice to see that the zoning change is having an effect. We are seeing, as you heard, more projects coming in, more units coming in, and a fairly even distribution of housing diversity throughout the community. As we look forward into the future, the Home in Tacoma initiative, when you all adopted it, talked about a review at a minimum at the 3-year time period. So we're obviously 1 year in. We've got some activity going. We're hearing concerns from both sides. And at the same time, there are some things that we know are on the docket that we really have to address here. Some of those include some more recent state laws. We were here about a month ago to talk about some of the state planning mandates that have come out from the legislature. So there's a few things that we're going to be queued up for this next year regarding affordability bonuses and some of the subdivision processes. But there's really ultimately a question on the table of what is the right time to more broadly look at Home in Tacoma, whether or not there should be modifications considered and a process initiated to look at that. And so that ultimately a question for council. I will say that in particular, we still have additional conversations to be had regarding the middle housing pilot. You know that we have a study session coming up at the end of June to talk about that initiative, which is really focused on trying to streamline the permitting process for some of the larger middle housing types. So that'll definitely be an opportunity to talk in more detail about specifics of permit process and level of service and streamlining initiatives and things like that. In addition, we're continuing to collect data. I know this has been one of the items that has been a lot of interest on the part of council and the part of community about kind of what's going on. It's part of why we're excited to be back here with this year one report, something we haven't traditionally done. But we are going to be shifting to a more regular reporting out of data, hopefully starting this summer and probably on like a quarterly basis. And the nice opportunity there is, whereas this focuses a lot on applications, as we start to get further down the road, that reporting can focus more and more on completed projects, and that will also allow us to get into more detail about some of the other key pieces of Home in Tacoma. So items like the use of the bonuses, the incentives that are in there. I know there's questions about ownership versus rental, questions about unit sizes, parking, trees, other things like that, which in many cases aren't reasonable to report on until we have completed projects, because that's where it really plays out exactly what has been done on the ground. And in addition, to hear more from the community. I mean, there's a recognition that where we stand here 1 year in, a significant portion of what we have been hearing from is the development community. right? The folks that are trying to go through the permit process, figure out how the new standards work, and put a project together and get that constructed. Because there's only so many on-the-ground projects, we're still hearing some from the community, but it's relatively limited in the grand scheme of things. So that is, as more projects come online, an item that we will get a better and better feel for, since obviously the Home in Tacoma initiative was both about initiating and supporting more housing development, but also doing it in a way that was reasonably compatible with existing neighborhoods. In addition, as far as future Home in Tacoma updates, and you see on there sort of just a question mark. Again, this is largely a discussion for council, but if we are going to move forward into some sort of Home in Tacoma code update process, questions about what the scope of what that would be, and questions about the timing. As we were here talking about state mandates a month ago, obviously one of our sort of normal practices is we're coming forward on an annual basis to talk about the planning work program. That's generally in the fall, so that will create another opportunity to have parts of this discussion, and certainly at a time that's more directly aligned even with the budgeting process. So with that overview, again, appreciate the opportunity to come and report in. We're excited about what we've been seeing and excited about what the future holds, but would love to hear any questions that you have.
Thank you, Brian. Are there any council questions or comments? Councilmember Sadalgi.
Thank you, Mayor. I was really excited for this one because I'd had a preview of this, and we had a week delay to get here, so this is amazing. First of all, I want to thank staff because this year's probably been pretty tough on you, you know? Home in Tacoma, I mean, let's call it what it is. It was a complete rewrite of all residential zoning in the city, right? Like hundreds of pages. I remember because I got hundreds of pages. So I want to thank staff on getting through this, because at the end of the day, it's really about results, right? Because we didn't really know what was happening. Before we get into some of my questions, I do want to reiterate some of the larger kind of policy questions and kind of considerations, right? So we know wholeheartedly that a lack of housing just exacerbates so many problems and makes solutions to many problems, whether it's in neighborhoods or individually to families, so much harder to solve because there aren't. So Home in Tacoma is one of the tools that we had started on back in 2021 when the comprehensive plan was updated to address that. And the premise is really simple, right? But the implementation is really more complicated. The premise is we have, at the time, we had what's called single-family exclusive zoning, which meant if you had a residential lot, no matter how large it was, generally you could build one and only one unit on it. Even if it had enough room for more, it was like pulling teeth, quote unquote. Depending on what year and what we were doing, we weren't really allowing much more than a second home. So if you could build 2 or 3 townhomes, you couldn't. And we said, you know what, housing is an issue. We need to correct for that and really look into what is a smart, responsible way of allowing greater density that still allows us to be responsible for our communities and our environment. Those were a set of questions that were being asked over and over again throughout this process. I'm also proud that we had so much community input. I had the, I guess I had the fortune or was not fortunate, depending on how you look at it, of being able to be part of this both in the Planning Commission and then at the council level. So I saw so much community input. We did an amazing job getting input from all variety of people to come up with a plan that still, you know, that values trees for the first time on residential development, that values amenity space, that comes up with a paradigm that says, hey, you know, developer, we'll let you build 4 if you can fit it, but if you can add 2 more, we'll let you do that if you income limit it. That's the first time we've ever done that as a way to do affordability incentives. We put a lot of really good thought in here, but we never knew if it was going to work or not. And I have to say, I am absolutely thrilled and excited at seeing these promising numbers, quite frankly. And the fact that we have these permits and the fact that they're getting through in about 2 months is a testament to the work that the team is doing that sometimes I don't think you guys are getting. So first of all, I wanted to thank you for just dealing with it. It's more than just copying and pasting and putting in a new zone. You have to do it day in and day out. So thank you. What I wanted to kind of point out is what really struck me were a couple of the two most important things. Slide 7. To me, that is where you see that, you know, basically you had a lot of multifamilies being built, and then all of a sudden we start seeing townhomes, ADUs, duplexes, and multiplexes being built, because that's exactly what we were trying to do. I have a question, which I'm pretty sure I know the answer to. The numbers you're seeing here, that's not total residential housing being made every year, because there's more than that being made in these larger, big apartment buildings. This is just in zones that were residential that got turned into a UR1, 2, or 3, correct?
Councilmember Sadalga, yeah, this data is specific to the urban residential zones, so does not include areas where we allow much bigger stuff, downtown, mixed-use centers, other areas like that, which obviously we're seeing residential development in
and
those
the point
as well.
for my colleagues was, for the first time in a really long time, I think it was 3 years in a row, if I remember the information on the state site, we've actually had more than 1,000 total housing units being made per year, I believe, for the last 3 years. And Home in Tacoma has, in my opinion, you don't have to agree with it, but when I looked at the data, I thought we increased what would have been done by about 300, like 300-ish as a conservative estimate was how much more we built because we had this new zoning in place than not. Which is actually a really phenomenal number, right? That's that's 20 to 30% of the growth that we saw in a year in permits was because of these zoning changes, and it was in these complexes that are designed to fit in with community. The next thing I kind of want to talk about, and this was actually the thing that I was the most pleased about, being from District 4. And having, a historically under-resourced, underserved areas in my district, I was afraid that all this development was just going to go to certain places that have been historically, winners in this. And to see that 20% was on the east side and 20% was in the south end, that 40% of these permitting are actually in areas that have been historically kind of under-resourced, was actually the thing that I'm most pleased with in these early numbers. I had a couple other questions. You had a few questions. So, when I think about what we move forward and the conversations I want to have with my colleagues, obviously it's around how do we get, are there other things we can do to get developers to really take advantage of those affordability bonuses? From what I understand, we really haven't had anyone take advantage of that yet. And just to reiterate for the public, the affordability bonuses we put in were things like in a UR1, a standard UR1, you're allowed 4 housing units. And if you can fit 2 additional, because you have a large lot, we'll give you 2 additional, but you have to limit it to 80% AMI. Those 2 additional have to be limited to 80% AMI as rental, 100% of AMI for sale. So how do we encourage those to be built by private actors? And obviously something that's near to me, which is owner-occupancy home ownership incentives for moderate income, like regular working families, and how do we build home ownership products for not the top 10-20% of households, but most of us in the bottom 80%. And I think we have some ideas, and it's something we should talk about because the information wasn't as the evidence wasn't as clear that we were building them at the pace we need to. The benefit is obviously, you know, a fixed 15, 30-year mortgage is a heck of a lot less volatile on your monthly cost of just housing than rent, right? And it allows for generational wealth, and our home ownership rate amongst historically marginalized communities is really low. And our home ownership rate overall is really low at 55%, much lower than state and national average and regional averages. So those are two things that I'd like to highlight for my colleagues as something to think about as we look into some updates. Two last things I wanted to mention. You kind of said something that goes to one of the kind of things I'd love to explore, which is how can we within our authority reduce friction for developers? And reducing friction does not mean to compromise what we decided to do, right? I've gone to developers and say, you know, no, you're going to have to put in trees. That is what the community wants. But let's figure out a way that allows you to get there. One thing you mentioned was, you know, nomenclature changes that we came up with, some nomenclature that's different than industry standard. I'd love to, you know, as we go offline, are there other, you know, things like this? Because that's like a little bit of friction that gets put in. And the question is that, you know, maybe that's a tiny little barrier, but a lot of these tiny little barriers become a big barrier. And we want to get additional developments. Maybe there's some interesting developers in other parts of the country that have some great ideas, and they're like, well, I don't understand these terminology. Can I even build here? Right. So that's obviously a concern. And then the last thing I want to leave for my colleagues is, this is one of the things we're doing for housing overall. This is largely a way to encourage private developers to stimulate additional housing growth. But we're also doing it in conjunction with things like our Affordable Housing Trust Fund, the way we manage our federal funding. I happen to know that since 2020 now, we have invested $20 million in a number of projects that have led to 608 100% income limited affordable housing units that have already opened in the last 5 years. And we got about $38 million in investments that are earmarked for another 638 units that are coming online in the next few years. That's, just shy of 1,300 affordable units that are coming online. And so these are tangible steps we're taking forward. And I say all this because this is one of those things we've talked about as a council. This is a great success, considering in the middle of the pandemic we had none of this, and we had no path to even get to these numbers. Naysayers will say it's not enough. Sure, it's not enough, but it's a lot more than zero, which is kind of where we were in the past. So, I'm going to end with, I am, again, just very pleased with the promising direction we're taking in this early juncture. And I think it's really important that we continue to do those additional little things, removing friction, looking at ways of incentivizing the types of behaviors we want from these private actors, while also supporting our other affordable housing actions that we're doing.
And I just want to say thank you for your kind messages on behalf of staff to recognizing the efforts there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Rumbaugh.
Thank you. And I too want to echo what Councilmember Sadalge said. I really appreciate what it's meant to be, our staff and the work that you do. And I really want to thank you for the administrative process. I believe I've never believed since I was a planner that everything is black and white. There is this gray area, and I appreciate that you have that authority to make those decisions. And it's going to bring up that I think out in Northeast Tacoma, I'm excited to see that people are trying different types of projects. And I want to say that we are underserved in that neighborhood because we have less sidewalks, less bus service, and I think limited commercial areas. So it's a different way of looking at the city, but also looking at what's surrounding these projects that are going in to try to make them blend into the neighborhood. So when we know that we already have a neighborhood of single-family houses, thinking more about what would look good, what fits and what blends into the neighborhood, especially when they're for sale units. And I'm thinking about the row houses that I know that a developer's putting in, and thinking about what's going to look best in the neighborhood so that the people who buy those properties feel that they're at the same par as the people who live across the street in the bigger single-family houses. Just thinking that that if the developer is willing to build so it looks similar, I'd like them to be able to. And I think one of those things is having private garbage cans. I know it sounds like such a little thing, right? But when you own your own house, you have your own garbage cans and you have your own recycling, and it's not a communal situation, which also causes other issues in neighborhoods. And I guess that would be something, since it's fee-based, that we should have to figure out, like in certain projects, maybe there's a different fee for being able to pick up garbage there. We understand that this project is going to be a different fee because, it's a lot more houses to have to pick up from. But I hope that we'll look at those things, because when I think about this part of Northeast Tacoma that I'm thinking of, I want people to want to buy houses there. I think that they deserve to have beautiful places to live, and if they want to live in that neighborhood and take advantage of what it means to be a little outside the city, I want them to feel like they belong in the neighborhood. And so that was something I was just thinking about, because it means having a different lens, a little bit different lens than, say, if you're building right in the city of Tacoma, it's going to be different. There's a lot more reasons why it would be different, but when you have more area and it's already a development of single-family homes all surrounding it, I would love them to feel like they belonged in the neighborhood. Yeah. So I appreciate if that was helpful feedback at all. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I'll just say the realities of putting more houses on the same size lot is surprisingly complicated. Maybe not surprisingly complicated. At some level, we knew this was going to be tricky going in, where you might have put one before, now you're going to place 4 or 6 or some number like that. And it is a lot of the relatively minor things like infrastructure, like garbage, are all things that the organization is still working through about what the best ways are to do those things, and we'll continue to work on that.
Thank you. Councilmember Palmer.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm a fan of all things home in Tacoma, and I appreciate the folks who are on the front lines making it happen. So Councilmember Rumbaugh's comment kind of reminded me of another thought that I've had. I wonder what it would look like what is a Tacoma architecture? What is something that our houses have in Tacoma that maybe other areas don't have due to our geographical location or the needs of our homeowners? And so I've been, I know we're coming out with different plans for pre-approved plans. And what if we made plans that didn't look like they could belong in any city, but they were special to Tacoma? And how would that attract more folks in to build? Couple of questions on the presentation. If we're looking at slide 6, I'm looking at similar numbers between 2021 and our first year in home in Tacoma for the total permits, and then I'm looking at similar numbers in 2022 and our first year for the total units. And I'm curious if there's a way, or is there any kind of correlation there between those numbers? Are there similar reasons, or can we say that these numbers are high this year because of home in Tacoma, or are there just similar circumstances to these past years?
Thanks for the question. A couple of things I'll point out, and at some level between the data shown on slide 6 and slide 7. I think there's no doubt when you look at the diversity of housing types that we're seeing, in most cases, those are housing types that you simply couldn't do or would have been very rare to be able to do in these areas. So almost inherently, that's more than we probably would have gotten previously. I think it's also important to recognize that overall, from a market perspective, we're actually in the midst of a slowdown to some extent. It's part of why you see, like on slide 7, the multifamily, there's some idiosyncrasies in the data, but there's a reality to the message there that larger projects are slowing down. I mean, the market uncertainty that we see around labor costs and material costs and tariffs and interest rates and all those sorts of things in the market, we've really started to see that reflected in permit activity starting this last year in 2025. So the fact that we are seeing at some level an increase in these areas despite that sort of overarching market struggle, I think is even more an encouraging message where, there is a reality to seeing the difference, and it really is playing out.
I appreciate that. I think maybe it would be helpful then to kind of see how our numbers are stacking up to maybe other similar cities or similar sized cities, because I'm sure everyone's experiencing slowdowns because of all of those factors. But it sounds like we're still successful through those factors, so that's great. And then on slide 13, I heard that you said that a lot of folks are just like, I didn't know I could do that. And so I'm wondering who's making up those folks. Is it like developers coming in and saying that, or is it like single family homeowners?
It tends to be property owners who were not necessarily part of the early conversations, maybe heard some of that public engagement, but hadn't personalized it to their own situation. And sometimes they're coming in asking about other sort of general questions, or I want to convert this. Well, actually, you could have 2 units or 3 units or something, and this is the process. So those kinds of questions tend to be from run-of-the-mill Tacoma residents.
Okay. So it sounds like, maybe a good way to reach some of those folks. Maybe it's a tag team thing with MCO to get the word out that this is a possibility and where we're at now. So we have such a cool thing happening here in Tacoma. We want folks that are here to take advantage of it, but we also want to reach out to folks outside that are wanting to move in and letting them know what the possibilities are too. So I'm thinking MCO and economic development, helping folks understand what the possibilities are. Thank you.
All right, appreciate it. Councilmember Hines.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I won't restate everything Councilor Stalgay said. I think he did a good job of encapsulating all the work the council's been doing for the last, 6 years since I've been here. Councilor Walker and I joined back in 2020, back when we first launched this thing called Home in Tacoma, that drew a lot of ire at the time. A few of us were here for the public meeting that went till 1 o'clock in the morning, taking comments on Home in Tacoma. So this is great to see all the work kind of coming to fruition and seeing some stuff come out of the ground. I have a couple questions, and then I'll answer your questions. So something you already alluded to, Brian, which I'd be very excited about, is getting close to that comparison of number of permits issued versus number of units, that come online. Because what we're seeing is a trend at the national level all across the country of permits at one level, but the number of units actually coming online and being occupied is below that. There's a clear gap there. So I would definitely, as we get further along with this, once we get more permit data, how many of those are actually turning into actual units? And that should be relatively easy to track, right? Because there's a certificate of occupancy that's issued at the end there, correct?
Yeah, all these projects get final inspections, so yeah, we know whether they actually turn into a unit with a key and all that kind of good stuff. So
now, and I think that will help us, because I think one of the things that is outside of our control when it comes to this, but I think everybody's alluded to it, right, is the cost to build and the cost to finance building, which has definitely changed, right? So I was at a meeting last week, right, and talked about 3 things have gone up in the last 5 years. The cost of labor, the cost of materials, and the cost to borrow. Right? So those 2 things are going up. So that leads to fewer things coming out of the ground. I mean, I was here in the halcyon days of 2021 when I don't know if anybody else refinanced their house for under 3%, but I did, and also borrowing money was dirt cheap. And so we saw a lot of multifamily projects come out of the ground because prices are cheap, lending is cheap, and now lending is more expensive. And so I think that's something to keep in mind as we look at this, is just the world we're in. I agree, Councilor Palmer, it'd be good to look at other cities and what they're doing, and kind of understanding the headwinds they're facing too as a comparison. Maybe something roughly similar size, but I would say probably in the state of Washington if we're going to do some comparisons, because the states play by different rules, and so it looks different depending on where you are. So your questions here at the end here, which are kind of next steps in scoping, I would say I'm interested in talking through what issues you're running into when you're talking to developers, or let's set developers aside, homeowners who are looking to build things on their property, right? What are the challenges they're running into? What are the issues they identified as they're trying to explore this code, and what we might want to clean up? I am not very interested in talking about the incentive and funding structures, mostly because of the headwinds we're seeing at the national around financing. And I would be concerned if we mess around too much with the bonuses, funding structures, that we won't actually get a clear read of whether or not it's working, if anybody's taking it, because right now the cost to borrow money is really high. So that, my colleagues may disagree with me on that one, but that's something I think I'd rather look at the technical fixes around what's going to take people to build it, and maybe not so much the incentive structure. I will say to Councilor Hidalgo's point, Councilor Rumaugh's point, everybody's point here about more home ownership opportunities. One thing I am clearly hearing is how difficult it is to do lot line division, speeds up a lot line division for some of these projects. That is a clear tool we can use to encourage more home ownership that does not require more money, does not require more incentives. It's just us figuring out the process to make it move faster. So I'd much rather talk about those kinds of things that are within our purview. And so is that something we're going to be kind of talking about, Brian, as we go forward to kick that on?
Yeah, a couple things. One, I think to you and Councilmember Palmer's question about other jurisdictions. One of the nice things is that as part of a number of these bills that the state has put in place over the last few years, they are doing a lot more tracking and reporting. And so we will start seeing more information coming out from the state that will give us a nice picture of what we are doing in comparison to other jurisdictions. As far as the property division stuff, actually on that slide that talks about some of the things that we need to do because of state mandates, more recent bills, at least a couple of those specifically relate to property divisions and modifications to those processes. So irrespective of whether or not there is interest in a bigger, broader opening of home in Tacoma, I think there's no doubt that over the next year or so, we will be looking at some of those subdivision tools.
Okay, I think that's most of my reflection. It's been a pleasure to work with you all and my colleagues who kind of looked at this over multiple years. I think the part that I would want to just posit for the council is it seems like when something's not happening that we want, the answer is we got to do more. We got to do more. And I would encourage us to maybe think, how do we do less and see more happen? How do we kind of cultivate the ground to see more stuff happen? The state is really adamant about zoning. And I made a comment to people, and I say this every single time. We have places in our city where things are zoned for growth, for really big things, and there is absolutely nothing there. There's parking lots, there's derelict buildings, there's vacant land. So the question I have is, obviously zoning is not the thing that's stopping that from happening. And so I would encourage us as we look at this going forward is maybe not saying zone. It might be, hey, what are we doing? What is the state doing? What is the county doing? What's out there that maybe is stopping that from happening? And just to kind of come back to that. So that's kind of stuff I'm looking forward to working on, and I look forward to working with my colleagues about that too. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Hines. A lot of very good comments. In particular, I too am very much interested in the cost factor, as well as just what we can do strategically to not just address costs, but also just expand opportunities. And so two major pain points that I keep hearing from the building community that weren't in this presentation, but I know we've talked about them because we've been in the same meetings talking about them in part, is off-site improvements and permitting timelines. And not necessarily within the scope of this particular topic, but you can't talk about one without the other. And just daylighting this, if nothing else, is the necessity of having some frank conversations about how we tackle and how we thread the needle between the necessity of funding infrastructure and making sure that we're not simply subsidizing projects on the entirety of the ratepayers, while at the same time making projects actually able to pencil, especially in an increasingly uncertain market with very small thresholds. I mean, that's a real thing, right? So being very cognizant of that. And a similar type of uncertainty that really affects builders is also just the global timeline for permits. I mean, I understand that PDS does the best they can, and we've certainly seen some momentum in that respect. But just like your average person doesn't make a distinction between, well, these are taxes I pay to the schools, to the city, to the state. I mean, for the average person, it's just taxes. The government is taxing me, right? And it doesn't really matter that there are permitting timelines for PDS, for Public Works, for Environmental Services, TPU, what have you. Pick another acronym out of your pocket, right? For them, it's just permitting. So getting as much of a handle on it as possible, and I understand that there is some really good progress being made there about global permitting timelines, not just a single department's, and also just a single person, a single person who can project manage the entire permit, getting as close to that unicorn of the one-stop shop for that, as well as just a better, more certain understanding of site development cost and who's responsible for what. These are just as much about timeline and certainty and convenience factor, just as much as out of pocket. And in the case of time, especially with borrowing costs, as many of my colleagues have mentioned, time literally is money, especially with today's rates. So being sensitive to those things as we move forward is really essential. But overall, I'm very pleased with what I've seen and really appreciate all your work and my colleagues' past work on this as well. I'm looking forward to continuing it. All right, thank you, everyone. So with that, it looks like there are no further council comments and questions. We look forward to continuing this very important topic later.
Thank you.
All right, our third topic, we have a council consideration request from Councilmember Scott pertaining to a request of the Tacoma Film Task Force sponsorship.
Thank you, Mayor. I am excited to share my proposal for a council contingency fund request to support the Grand Cinemas Film Task Force. I want to start by sharing that filmmaking is not just an important part of the work our creative economy is doing, it can also be a powerful economic development tool. Filmmaking can foster a wide range of jobs, engagement with our local businesses, as well as tourism. However, Tacoma only issued 11 film permits last year. Meanwhile, Seattle issued about 360. The permitted projects in Seattle helped employ more than 4,000 local crew and cast members. Tacoma should be attracting more film projects. We have fantastic locations, great hotels and parking lots for film crews to use. Plus, we have a great community of people who work in the industry that are living right here in Tacoma. During the past couple of years, I've been meeting with a number of people who are engaged in the filmmaking community and trying to find ways to expand and enhance the film industry here in Tacoma. One of the key themes I often hear about our film industry is that it has a lot of energy and momentum along with a talented and passionate filmmaking community, but that it lacks organization and leadership. I think a film task force could help fix this. That's why I am proposing that we provide $10,000 in council contingency funds to support the Grand Cinemas Task Force. The task force would have a diverse range of participants, and their scope of work would include developing proposals and recommendations for the City Council on code and permitting updates, enhancing local film project connectivity, and much more. I want to thank my EDC colleagues for co-sponsoring this proposal, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Councilmember Scott, for bringing this forward. Councilmember Walker, followed by Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councilmember Scott. I'm excited about this, and that statistic is shocking. Does this already exist, and we're helping keep it going, or are we starting it?
This will be us helping to get the ball rolling.
Okay, awesome.
And I will say though that the Grand Cinema has done other things that are working to connect filmmakers across the sector and across the city. But this would be something that's kind of taking all of those various pieces that they're working on and individuals are working on that kinds of brings it under an umbrella that's a little bit more focused.
Okay, awesome. And then would that group be a group that would report to the city? Because I feel like that'd be a really interesting thing just because I don't know that much about it.
So the Grand Cinema will be over it, but part of the work that we've talked about with the Grand Cinema is, so one of the things Ashley over at TVE is working on some kind of streamlining some of the permitting process to make it a bit easier for folks. I'm also going to be working with Christina Kahn on updating our motion picture municipal code, which, if you didn't know that we have. And so I think it hasn't been updated since like 92. And so working on that on this side and being able to share that with that task force to get their input as people who are directly working in the industry and can kind of help us think about things that we might not be thinking about from our policy side of things, or even on the administrative side of things, that they can help us clue into, so that we get closer to something that's workable for everybody.
Okay, awesome. And then last question is does $10,000 get them a year? Or is there a timeline, or is it just sort of whatever can help for as long as possible, or do they plan to do it indefinitely even without us?
This will help with, we tried to pinpoint a timeline, but it was kind of hard to figure out, without having the people there specifically, is this something that they want to sit down and grind out for a couple of weeks intensely? Is it a few meetings, per quarter throughout the year? And so the hope is that this is something that could be sustained long term, but this is just kind of the first starting point.
Awesome. Sounds cool.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor, and just really appreciate Councilmember Scott for doing a lot of the legwork and groundwork on this, and I know you've been really connected with the film industry in Tacoma. And Tacoma has a strong film history, and I think it's really important that we are supporting folks in this industry, because it's not just an economic development opportunity for just the filmmakers, but there's so many follow-on and supportive industries around film that could be very beneficial to small businesses all across the city. And so I think I would consider this a small investment in, I think, what could be potentially a very really beneficial program for the city. But I also recognize and appreciate that this is a community-led task force and not necessarily a city-led initiative specifically. There are certainly some things that we can do to support the film industry in Tacoma, and I think reviewing policies and codes is a big part of that. But I think the most successful programs and things that happen in our city happen at the grassroots level, and I think this is a great opportunity to support that level of work. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to sign on this. I'm really excited about it, and I'm looking forward to continue being a partner in this. So thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Councilmember Diaz.
Thank you. I just want to thank Councilmember Scott for her work on this, and really cultivating it with the Economic Development Committee, and particularly for the work that the task force is going to do to be able to help inform that motion picture ordinance or code update that we need to make. Hearing that it hasn't been updated since 1992 is wild, so I think we're definitely due for an update and due for some modernization on how we can help make sure that we're bringing this piece of the arts to Tacoma, because we are such an art-rich community, and it is such an important economic driver. And quite frankly, there's so many Californians moving up here that they could use a lot of these jobs. And so I think it would be really helpful for us as we're thinking about how we grow and learn and make sure that we're achieving all of our different destinies. I think this is a really cool kickstart. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Councilmember Palmer.
Yeah, I just wanted to also say thank you for bringing this forward and allowing me to sign on to it. We talked about a little bit in the committee about how attractive this industry is to younger folks, and Tacoma has a little bit of a issue with keeping our folks here. Once they learn and have developed here, a lot of them will go out to other cities, and so I think that this is the start of maybe a possibility of a way to keep them here. The other thing I wanted to say, maybe it was because of our meeting this morning, but there seems to be a natural connection with our sister city program and the Grand Cinema, and so it's there's a ton of possibility of bringing film industries over, filmmakers over from other countries as well. I don't know if I know everything's kind of still up in the air, but is that kind of a little bit of a conversation that's been had about who's on the committee or task force? It's a cooler name for sure.
It does sound pretty cool. Haven't had that direct conversation with the Grand. I do know that Mr. Jamal, Syed Jamal, who does, he's the one who helped us make our connection in India with their sister city there. I know a big piece of that connection was the work around film that, specifically with Bollywood, and then seeing the growing industry and interest here in the city. And so he's connected with the Grand, and so that the community is vigorous, but it's also pretty tight-knit. So even though there haven't been direct conversations, I imagine that this is something he would be interested in, as well as other folks who have been connected with our sister cities as well. And the Grand for sure, especially because they also do their film festival, which brings in films from not just local, regionally, but there are international folks as well who submit.
Wonderful. Well, seeing no other comments, thank you, Councilmember Scott, for bringing this forward. Looks like a great idea. With that, are there any other items of interest? Okay, seeing no other items, are there any committee reports to share? Minor update, as Councilmember Hines alluded, the Association of Washington Cities just sent the word out to communities all throughout the state about the opportunity to join various volunteer boards, either with AWC itself, along with various other state boards and advisory councils. All the details are in your inboxes. Can be a great way of getting more informed, assisting with the city, and just doing your part. So feel free to take a look. If there's any interest, then feel free to follow up, and we'll be talking. So with that, seeing no other committee reports, we're going to move on to the agenda review and city manager's weekly report. And I'd like to call on Deputy City Manager Allison Griffith.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Just to review for this evening's meeting, there are 3 ceremonials on tonight's agenda. The first is proclaiming Monday, May 4th as International Firefighters Day. The second is proclaiming May 2026 as Bike Month. And the third is proclaiming May 2026 as Literary Month. There are no modifications to tonight's agenda. There are 2 opportunities for public comment this evening. The first is under regular public comment regarding motions, resolutions, and ordinances on tonight's agenda. The second opportunity is a public hearing on the proposed annexation of 10 parcels of land located adjacent to the city in the Fife Heights potential annexation area. Please let me know if there's any questions related to tonight's agenda so that staff can be prepared to respond accordingly. And for your review, attached to the study session agenda is the weekly report to council. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Allison. So with that, I will entertain a motion to convene to an executive session pursuant to RCW 42.30.110, Section 1G, to review the performance of a public employee not to exceed 30 minutes.
So moved.
Second. Moved and seconded. All those in favor to convene to an executive session, please signify by saying aye. 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 Those opposed say nay. We are going to exec.
Calling back the order the council study session to extend for an additional 30 minutes. bringing back the study session to extend for an additional 30 minutes. Thank you. Have a great day. I'm bringing back to order the study session of City Council to extend for an additional 15 minutes. Thank you. I'll call back order the study session of City Council to adjourn. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.